Today, we're diving into a single number that can pretty much tell you the pulse of a company, the inventory turnover ratio. Think of it as a powerful tool for measuring a business's health by looking at just one thing: speed.
So let's start with a really simple but really powerful question. It's at the heart of any company that sells, actual stuff. How fast do the things on the shelf become cold, hard cash in the bank? The answer to that tells you so much about how well that business is really running.
All right, let's get right into the core idea. We're really just trying to measure the speed of the business, or what analysts like to call inventory velocity. A great way to think about it is like the RPMs on a car's engine. It tells you how hard that business is really working under the hood.
So here's the formal definition. The inventory turnover ratio, or ITR, it tracks how many times a company sells through its entire stock in a certain period, usually a year. So if the ratio is, say, 2, it means they sold and restocked their average inventory twice that year. It's a really dynamic way to measure how efficient they are.
Okay, but why does this matter so much? Well, because this one number gives you a read on several different things all at once. A high turnover, that suggests strong sales and high demand for their products. It also means the company isn't tying up a bunch of cash and stuff that's just sitting in a warehouse, which of course cuts down on costs like storage and insurance and lowers the risk of that inventory becoming outdated or useless.
Now let's get into how we actually calculate this thing. And don't worry, the math itself is pretty straightforward, but understanding how it's built gives you a much deeper insight into what the number is really telling you. Here's the formula. You take the cost of goods sold, you'll see it called COGS, and you divide it by the average inventory. Now here's a really key detail. We use COGS, not sales revenue. Why? Well, because both inventory and COGS are recorded at cost. This gives us a true apples-to-apples comparison of efficiency, without profit margins muddying the waters.
So it's really just a simple two-step process. First, you figure out the average inventory. Just take the inventory value at the start of the period, add the value at the end, and then divide by 2. This just smooths out any weird spikes or dips. Then, you just divide your COGS by that average. That's it.
Let's make this real with an example. Imagine a company's cost of goods sold is $500,000. Their inventory at the beginning of the year was $250,000, and at the end, it was $275,000. Okay, so that gives us an average inventory of $262,500. You divide the COGS by that average, and boom, you get your ratio, 1.90. It's that simple. It means the company sold through its entire stock almost twice that year.
Sometimes it's just easier to think in terms of days instead of times per year. And for that, we can use a related metric called Days Sales in Inventory, or DSI. All you do is divide 365 by your turnover ratio. So for our example, with a ratio of 1.90, the DSI comes out to about 192 days. That tells you, on average, a product sits on the shelf for 192 days before somebody buys it. Much more intuitive, right?
Okay, so we've got our number, but what's it actually telling us? You might just assume that a higher number is always better, but, it's not quite that simple. Let's get into how to actually interpret this thing. This really gets to the heart of the trade-off. On one hand, a high turnover is great. It signals strong sales, high efficiency. But the risk is that if you're running too lean, you can run out of stock. You end up missing sales and making customers angry. On the other hand, a low turnover gives you a nice buffer against stockouts, but it also suggests weak demand and means you're paying a lot to have all that inventory just sitting there, collecting dust.
So the goal isn't just to get the highest number you possibly can. The real strategic goal here is finding that sweet spot, that perfect speed that minimizes the total cost of your inventory. It's this constant balancing act between the cost of holding the stock and the cost of ordering more of it. All right, now for what might be the single most important part of this whole analysis. This ratio, by itself, is completely and utterly meaningless without context. You absolutely have to compare it to the right benchmarks.
To put it simply, what's considered a good number in one industry could be an absolute disaster in another. Trying to compare a high-volume grocery store that sells milk and bread to a low-volume luxury watchmaker, it's just useless. The comparison has to be specific to the industry you're looking at.
And just look at how massive these differences can be. Trucking is over 240. That's because they don't really have inventory in the way we normally think about it. Their cost of goods is basically their operating expenses. Now compare that to apparel manufacturing at less than 3.
They have these long production cycles, seasonal risks, so their inventory just naturally moves a whole lot slower.
Okay, now here's a pro-level insight and a trap that a lot of people fall into. The final number you see can actually be twisted and distorted by a company's accounting choices. This is a really crucial limitation you have to understand.
This all comes down to the difference between FIFO and LIFO accounting methods, especially when inflation is high. With FIFO, first in, first out, you sell the oldest, cheapest stock first. That gives you a lower COGS, which results in a lower turnover ratio. But with LIFO, last in, first out, you sell the newest, most expensive stock first. That means a higher COGS, which results in a higher turnover ratio. The bottom line, a company using LIFO can look way more efficient on paper, just because of an accounting choice. That's so important to know when you're comparing competitors.
And it doesn't stop there. Other things can temporarily mess with the ratio. You've got seasonality, like a retailer who does most of their business in one quarter. Or think about aggressive discount sales that pump up sales volume for a short time. Even big economic shifts that change how much people are buying across the board can skew the number.
For our final section, let's zoom out and connect this to the bigger picture. This ratio doesn't exist in a bubble. It's actually a critical piece of a company's overall financial health, especially when it comes to its cash flow.
You see, the inventory turnover ratio is a key ingredient for a master metric of liquidity called the cash conversion cycle, or CCC. The CCC measures the entire timeline from the moment a company pays for its inventory to the moment it collects the cash from the customer who bought it.
And look at this, the very first piece of that formula, DIO, or Days Inventory Outstanding. That's just the DSI we calculated earlier. This shows you just how fundamental inventory management is to a company's cash flow. It's literally the first step in the cycle of turning products into money.
And this is the ultimate connection. When you speed up your inventory turnover, you shorten the amount of time your cash is frozen as physical stuff on a shelf. That directly shrinks your cash conversion cycle, which frees up capital that you can then use for growth, to pay down debt, or to return value to your shareholders. It's a huge deal.
So what's the big takeaway here? After all the math and all the comparisons, the real question isn't just about speed for speed's sake. It's about whether that speed is creating sustainable value for the business in the long run. That's the strategic insight that truly matters.